Now, there are strong indications that the Central Bank of Nigeria could raise the nation's benchmark interest rate as inflation rate heads to a 7-month high. The Apex Bank is projected to jettison its dovish hawkish stance and begin a tightening cycle by raising the baseline interest rate in response to spiraling inflationary trend, which is expected to hit a 7-month high. At the next announcement, the National Bureau of Statistics is scheduled to release the April 2022 inflation rate ahead of the meeting of the CBN's Monetary Policy Committee in May 23 and 24 respectively. But the projected headline inflation is set to increase again by 0.28% to 16.2% in the month of April. And this continuous rise is likely to form a major part of deliberations at the NPC meeting this month, as the committee is likely to take the bull by the horn, according to analysts. All right, to discuss this now is Mr. Viola. Mr. Viola is the head of research, a policy researcher and senior analyst at the Budget Foundation, Lagos. Thank you. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. I want us to start just before we talk about what the CBN will be looking at in their next NPC meeting. I want us to focus on the inflation rate a bit. Across the globe, every economy seems to be battling on how to address the inflation. Analysts say Nigeria's April inflation is projected to hit 16% for the first time in 7 months, as global inflation is at record levels. So what's your take on this projection? Let's start from there.
So I think the projection is timely. The projection is realistic. There have been rumors that the CBN would take a more restrictive stance on the use of the interest rate as a monetary policy tool. So the CBN has various tools in its arsenal to ensure price stability, to ensure exchange rate stability, to ensure that inflation, well, quite recently, is down to reasonable levels. The CBN had intended to keep its inflation rates targets between 6 to 9%, but it seems like it's needed to review those figures and perhaps increase that target, because as time went on, the inflation rate began to climb beyond 10 to 11 to 12 to 13, and now it's likely going to hit 16% or 16.2% thereabouts. So this stance to increase the interest rate is perhaps has been a long time coming, to be very honest.
What are some of the indicators that you suppose are the things that may likely raise the raise the interest rate? I beg your pardon, the inflation rate from what it is now.
Yes, so I mean the cost of goods and services. The principle behind inflation, or why it occurs, is simply when you have too much money chasing too few goods. This may not be few as in numerical quantity, but the cost of those goods has increased or has gotten beyond what it used to be. So you now have to have more naira or more of whatever currency you have to purchase those goods and those services. It also means that the cost of doing business has increased. Perhaps the cost of inputs for various goods and services, for food-related commodities, for non-food commodities, for transportation has increased, thereby forcing producers, forcing sellers to increase their own prices, thereby causing that knock-on effect for the rest of the economy.
I mean, let's look at now what do you think, because we've seen figures saying that the household consumption in 2021 has risen from around 180 something trillion naira to over 190 trillion naira in 2021. What's the implication of this for Nigeria, given the fact that even income has not changed for most average Nigerian? Hello, Mr. Vala.
You mentioned trillions. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. So, I mean, you look at the figures you just quoted, and you ask yourself, have they themselves been corrected for inflation? And the question then becomes, what is the worth, or what is the value of that increase in consumption in relation to the amount of possible goods and services that can be purchased? Now, the COVID-19 pandemic really did cause a depression in most economies around the world, and things seem to have taken a nosedive with the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and commodity crunches here and there, and then of course the internal security problem in Nigeria. Really, all of these things will have a negative effect on household consumption, because the individuals in households, they transport themselves. And with the increase in petroleum, with the queues we just witnessed a couple of months ago, with the problems of banditry and insecurity in the north, which means farmers do not have access to farms, and when they do, it is at their own risk, thereby shooting prices up. I mean, it's expected that this will cause a serious leap in the amount of monies that households are spending on their consumptions, and this will also mean that they will have less for other spendings. Nigerians, on average, tend to spend nearly 70% of their income on out-of-pocket spending for health. So if you are spending more on household consumption, you're having less available for education, less available for health, and this will have very devastating effects on the incomes and the flourishing of households in Nigeria.
So we expect things to get worse. Should the weekend, this inflation figure for April, should the rises as projected, so how is that likely to impact, or get things worse?
Yes, it's likely that things will get worse before they get better. To compound the problem, we are in an election season, so the economy will really be excessively liquid. And I think increasing the interest rate is perhaps the best solution, at least in the short to medium term. Make it more expensive to borrow. But the question then becomes, apart from just borrowing, making the rates on treasury bills and other government securities even more. But the question then becomes just how much of this will have an impact on the economy. How much of the credit sector really is interacted with by the average Nigerian? Because the questions that I ask is, when you do increase the interest rate, if the people losing different income profiles, the question of tightening this monetary policy stance will then be, an open question, really, because if the average Nigerian is not benefiting from this tightened monetary policy stance, and if it's going to help the elites or those that have higher incomes, what kind of economy are we trying to create for Nigeria in the medium to long term?
So just to be clear, are you saying that raising interest rate, as some analysts have projected, may not be the best interest, or may not be the best of time for Nigeria? Hello, Mr. Vala.
Yeah, okay. I think I can hear you now.
Yes. So I was asking you, based on what you said earlier, are you saying that raising interest rate in the next MPC meeting may not be the best interest of the masses, the poor masses? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but I'm saying that's conditional on one very critical factor. Okay. The raising of interest rates is meant to reduce excessive liquidity, but you are sort of caught between the devil and the deep blue sea as a central bank, because when you do raise the interest rates and you make it more expensive to borrow, yes, you will reduce liquidity, but will that help the average Nigerian whose incomes have already taken a hit, due to this long-run inflation? If you keep it stable you might allow the conditions that led to the high inflation to persist. If you reduce the interest rate and you make it cheaper to borrow, then you will increase the liquidity in the economy and perhaps even cause hyperinflation. So monetary policy committee meetings are never pleasant things to do. As a matter of fact, monetary policy itself is subject to numerous variables, many of which are not really within the control of the central bank, which is why we try to advocate for better synergy between the central bank and the fiscal authorities, the Ministry of Budget and Planning, the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, so that the spending profiles, the spending decisions, the spending plans, the specific sectors in which investments are made by the federal government can be used to improve the productivity of Nigerians, can be used to improve the doing business profile, so that businesses and service providers will find it cheaper and easier to produce their goods, thereby bringing the cost of producing those goods down, and making it easier for Nigerians to buy goods and services. I mean, these are some of the things that can have a positive impact on the inflation rate. But as it stands, it's uncertain if this meeting and the likely move by the CBN to increase the interest rate will positively influence the average Nigerian.
What's the ideal options here? Mr. Viola would like to ask, what's your ideal option here? Should the inflation rate goes up than what it is now at 15.99% to 16.2% has projected, what should the CBN do? Leave the interest rate at what it is or jack it up a little bit?
I mean, I'm not a policy expert, but I will say that the textbook route would certainly be to increase the interest rates. I mean, anyone you ask would know and say the same, because to reduce this excess liquidity,
yes,
which is the driver of inflation, you would have to rein in, make it more expensive for loans to be acquired, make it more expensive, for money to flood the system, thereby potentially bringing it down. But the question then becomes, how does money enter into the financial system? How do businesses, how do individuals, how do households get these credit facilities or get these monies? And how much of the labor force, how much of the productive sectors of the economy really come into contact with this finance, with these monies? Okay. And then from then you can determine what type of relationship exists and be able to make forecasts and projections as to who will be the ultimate gainer or the ultimate loser in this situation.
If you look at most economies around the world, even the developed economies, the inflation rate is really going through the roof. US, for instance, hit a 40-year high, and the UK and the EU are at a 3-decade high as well. How much effect does this have on Nigeria?
I mean, a lot of the things that impact the interest rates and the inflation rates of these various countries affect countries around the globe. The 2008 fiscal credit crunch in the US had effects as far as Southeast Asia. So the war, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, definitely is one of those impacts, is one of those causes of this high inflation rate. And it's likely that it might persist, because we're talking about the impact this war will have on global supply chains. And a lot of these developed countries, they have some form of interaction with these global supply chains. So yes, Nigeria might also have an effect on its own economy, which may not be very different from the developed economies. But the difference would really be in how these issues are handled and how much control the various monetary and fiscal authorities have over the economy, of interventions and their impact on the economy. Those would be the real differences between the United States and Nigeria, between the United Kingdom and Nigeria. The underlying level of productivity will also be a serious determinant of the differences between these economies. Of course, the US and the UK are far more productive. There's much more capacity utilization in the private sector.
Hello, Mr. Viola. Hello, Mr. Viola. Well, I guess we're trying to losing audio, losing connection with Mr. Viola Kwaga. Hello, Mr. Viola. Can you hear me? Okay.
All yes, right. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, let's try to wrap it up with this one. Inflation is a major economic issue across the globe as central bank chiefs are becoming more aggressive in the fight against the trend. Recently, of course, we've seen the Federal Reserve increase interest rate by 50 basis points just in a way to address the inflation rate, inflation rate a bit. How do you think the CBN is responding to some of these issues or these economic indicators we are seeing, given the fact that the man at the helm of affair seems to be involved in politics at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, the central bank can do what it can to work on inflation. And controlling the interest rate is a form of inflation rate targeting. It is not a perfect tool because, like I mentioned earlier, there are several variables that are not even within the control of the central bank. More so, economic policy decisions are always late in the sense that you will have to wait 2, 3, 4 months to actually see the effect of a decision taken those months before. So you're always looking backwards to ensure you've taken the right step. That is a very difficult way of making decisions at the national level. But I will say that the decision is never an easy one. But as far as logical reasoning is concerned, the CBN is going to take the right decision by tightening. By increasing the interest rate. On the issue of the involvement of the CBN central bank governor in politics, I can say that really leaves a lot to be desired. And Nigerians and the international community, I'm sure, are very pleased with this open displays of partisanship. The central bank is first and foremost a public institution, and the leaders of that institution are meant to display zero partisanship. It is a non-partisan, very sensitive seat. And the risks, the vulnerabilities that he has now exposed his office to can actually be raised by anyone to say, how is Nigeria not sure that he is not being used by the party in question to make loans available or cheap credit available to his party? I mean, this is embarrassing to say the least. And a lot of well-meaning Nigerians have called for his resignation, which I think is something that he should take very seriously.
Well, we just hope that we'll see a positive response and from CBN at the MPC meeting coming up in the next 2 weeks. Thank you for your time. Mr. Viola Kwaga is a policy analyst, a researcher and senior analyst at the Budget Foundation, Lagos. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.